Okay, we're live on YouTube.
Bore da croeso the annual general meeting of Betsy Cadwaladr University Health Board. We have checked the translation services from members of the board, and we are now live streaming the meeting. I've not received any apologies directly, but I do know that Arpan, the medical director, Mark, the director of planning and strategy, and John Cunliffe, one of the independent members, can't be with us today, albeit I see John has joined, so that must be incorrect. Before I go on to the substantive items, I'd also like to welcome members who've joined the board in recent months to their first annual general meeting. That's Joe Whitehead, the Chief Executive, Linda Thomas, Independent Member, and Claire Budden, Associate Member and Chair of the Stakeholder Reference Group. So without further ado, I will take us on to substantive items. And the first is the annual report and accounts. And Joe, I think you are going to start with the annual report, and Chris, you're going to share the presentation.
Bore da croeso I cyfarfod. I'm Joe Whitehead, Chief Executive of Betsy Cadwaladr University Hospital Trust, and delighted to be joining for my first annual general meeting. I'd like to start the conversations with regard to our annual report by asking Chris to share and play on screen a video which acknowledges the achievements and challenges for Betsy Cadwaladr and for the population of North Wales as we have managed through a COVID year. Thank you.
I'm Fiona Johnston, Area Director in the West for the Health Board, and as you can see we're in Canolfan Brailsford Centre, now Ysbyty Enfys in Bangor, and this would have been one of the gyms or one of the sports rooms that we've actually managed to convert into a temporary hospital.
Today we're literally stood shoulder to shoulder as colleagues.
Please stay at home. Please avoid unnecessary travel. This is the best thing you can do to help protect your own health, the health of your family, and the more fragile members of our community.
I'm David Hamilton. I've recently recovered from COVID-19. I've just come out of the ICU ward in Wrexham, where I've been there for 2 weeks. I've been on a ventilator for 9 days and come through it. I can't say enough about the staff, they've been absolutely wonderful.
We wanted to thank everyone at the Wrexham Mile Hospital for bringing our dad home. We can't thank you enough.
Dwi'n teimlo'n yn lwcus iawn o lle dwi. Achos o'n gen i, o'n i'n meddwl bob amser swn i'n gael, oedd yna gen i fawr o obaith, achos o'n gen i gymaint o bethau eraill yn wrong yna. Allai byth diolch yn digon iddyn nhw dweud y gwir. Staff Brynderil a Ysbyty Gwynedd, o pawb yn feddwl, wel, o ffain.
This evening, a mother who was diagnosed with breast cancer during the height of lockdown is urging others not to delay seeking help despite the current health crisis.
The importance is that don't think that COVID has the monopoly of the NHS, because it doesn't. You know, it's really important that if there's any concerns that you have, that you go to your doctors, that you feel confident in your GP, first of all, and that you feel confident in the hospitals, that you feel confident in everybody that's working there, who are working extremely hard to try and keep everything running as clearly as possible.
I have decided that Betsy Cadwaladr University Health Board will come out of special measures with immediate effect.
When I spoke to the new head of Betsy Cadwaladr earlier this week, Jo Whitehead spoke of her ambition of turning it around to be the best performing health board.
And undoubtedly being able to speak positively about moving into targeted intervention.
It may look like any other delivery at this time of year, but what's inside this box is one of the most precious substances on Earth, and it's now arrived in Wales.
It's a significant milestone for NHS in Wales and in Betsy Cadwaladr today by reaching the million of the first vaccine doses.
Okay, Chris, do you want to take that down? And Joe, do you want to move to the annual report? I thought that was a sterling opening to the meeting, by the way, Joe. Thank you.
Thank you. Chair, through you, if I may ask Chris to put the slides up, I'll use those to reflect on our year and deal with our annual report through the presentation. Thank you. So Chris, on to the first slide. So for Betsy Cadwaladr, alongside all organisations, a year of exceptional change and challenge to which the organisation has responded exceptionally well. And I'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge and say thank you to all of the staff who have collectively gathered us through this last year, and to say thank you to my executive director colleagues, to Simon Dean and to Jill Harris, who acted as acting chief executives during the course of this year. During this year, as the previous minister confirmed in our video, we were de-escalated from special measures to targeted improvement, with a focus across mental health, engagement, strategy planning, performance and leadership, with a requirement for us as an organisation, in partnership with our patients, staff and partners, to secure significant improvements in each of those four areas of performance. We've embraced our approach to targeted intervention, our improvements, our journey, our success is really, really important to us going forward. And to reflect on some of our successes, I'd like to take us into 3 slides where we really take the time and reflect on the work of our staff, of our partners, and with the people of North Wales to deliver fantastic change. Thank you, Chris. Next slide. So across the first set of achievements, a focus around our services that look at supporting the most vulnerable in our society, whether they are people at home in need of our services, our younger generation who have faced significant change to their lives during the period of COVID time, and those who are we work with those who are working through their prison sentences to deal with some of the significant health and deprivation and health inequality challenges that sit within our prison partnership. and to work in order to ensure that our one of our biggest healthcare services, that of pharmacy and medicines management, both within the hospital and community settings, are made as easily available to all as is possible. Thank you. Moving on to a second set of achievements, again calling out our significant commitment to dental services in the community and within specialist secondary care, as well as thinking about our commitment to the future with the development of our dental academy. And of course, we see dental services being an integral part of the potential and highly desired move towards a medical and medical sciences school in North Wales, which we hope will be announced soon. One of our COVID interventions that we're particularly proud of within dental services, but also applies across into our more general healthcare services, is the ability to attend anywhere, to continue to provide health services in people's homes across the full range of the geography of North Wales, which has its rural and remote challenges, to make sure that we're able to bring those services into homes in a timely way. And thinking about our women's and children's services, making sure that we continue to provide safe and appropriate women-centred services for the population of North Wales as they move into the important stage of life, becoming parents. And of course, lastly, but most significantly, continuing to do all of these improvements whilst maintaining services in pandemic conditions. And the third set of achievements, supporting our staff in acknowledgement of the challenges with regard to providing safe and appropriate services through the pandemic, whilst recognising that our staff are our patients from time to time, their families and friends are our patients, and they need our support to stay strong in order to provide ongoing services. To support our mental health services, not only across the full range of inpatient and community-based services, but to really embrace the contribution that well-being has such a positive impact on individuals' mental health by ensuring that our service users, the people who are part of our service, are fully able to engage with employment as part of their therapeutic journey. And finally, and very significantly, to participate not only in significant research around vaccinations, but also to deliver a large vaccination programme, which I touch on in my next slide. Thank you. I'd like to call out and acknowledge the willingness of all of our staff to take on new roles, different roles, to reacquaint themselves with appropriate training and support into spaces where they had previously worked as a clinician, possibly, in order to ensure that we were able to fully respond during the COVID pandemic at times of high intensity from a TTP point of view and from an inpatient and ICU point of view. To create, set up and sustain over an incredibly long period of time appropriate communication and command and control mechanisms that have enabled us to ensure complex coordination during times of COVID. We've consistently seen, and this support is ongoing, of support from hospital to hospital, community site to community site, primary care practitioner to primary care practitioner in order to overcome adversity over the last year. The video showed the creation of the Envis hospitals, a remarkable testament to partnership and commitment to bring services together quickly and effectively. Of course, all of this has been underpinned by a public health response, including TTP, which has in partnership enabled us to create a very, very strong healthcare related response to the COVID-19 pandemic, supported in most recent times with the rolling out of a significant vaccination programme. We in North Wales are leading the world in the rollout of the vaccinations, and we are very proud of the contribution that our staff, our partners and our volunteers have made to seeing the successful rollout of the vaccination. I'm very, very proud. Thank you. Next slide. Looking to the future, we have much to learn from our COVID-19 experiences, and we have much to acknowledge in terms of not only living with COVID-19, with wave 3, with variants, which we anticipate will continue, but also to acknowledge the challenges that we will be facing and are dealing with now as we move into my presentation, which will follow shortly, around our priorities for our current year. Diolch yn fawr. Thank you.
Thanks, Jo. So any questions or observations from members of the board? No. So, okay, Jo, let me acknowledge the work that you highlighted, particularly in terms of our staff and frontline staff, particularly during the pandemic, and the challenges that they faced in that regard, which have been unique, and the much good work that you've highlighted, be that in terms of the vaccination programme or more generally responding in conjunction with our partners. One of the local authority chief executives made a comment quite recently at what the regional leadership board meeting to say that he felt partnership working between the health board and local authorities has never been better, and I think that's absolutely right, and that's a product of the many efforts that you independent members, senior managers in the organisations and others have made to ensure that together we are responding to the challenges of the pandemic here and now, but also the future. So I think the board ought to recognise that fact, and we look forward to continuing to build on those relationships with our partners. So there are no other points highlighted, so let's move on then, Jo, as you suggested, to the next part of your presentation. Sorry, Jo, did you, I'm looking at your agenda actually, do you want to do that now or do you want me to take the annual accounts first? How would you prefer to do it?
Annual accounts, please, and then we'll go into next year. Diolch yn fawr.
Okay, thanks. So, Sue, annual accounts, please.
Bore da, Sue Hill dwi, cyfarwyddwr gweithredol Cothyd. Good morning, I'm Sue Hill, I'm the Executive Director of Finance, and I'm just going to take you through a presentation which will cover the financial performance for 2020-2021, and will also describe the impact of COVID-19 and describe the strategic support provided by Welsh Government. Thanks, Chris. So we just move on to the first slide. So the Health Board has two statutory financial duties. The first is to ensure that expenditure does not exceed the funding given over a 3-year period. And the second financial duty is to prepare an integrated medium-term plan for the following 3-year period. Next slide, please, Chris. We also have two financial duties. One is about looking after our local suppliers. So we have to pay 95% of all non-NHS invoices within 30 days of receipt of goods or invoice. And we also have to keep our closing cash balance within a tolerance limit. And I will describe our performance against that on the next couple of slides. So this slide just therefore shows our performance against those 4 targets. So in terms of the 2 financial duties, you can see that in 2021, for the first time, we actually achieved that resource expenditure, as in we lived within our means. We also spent all our capital, which is a way that we replenish the equipment and estate that we have. We achieved the non-NHS target by 1%, which is really good for our suppliers, and we also kept our cash balance within the right limit. In terms of the integrated medium-term plan, the whole of NHS Wales operated under an annual operating plan because of the impact of COVID, which means there wasn't everybody was producing an annual plan, so nobody was producing an integrated medium-term plan. So this slide just shows in a bit more detail that first financial duty. So you can see that the first top half of the slide covers the operating costs. So you can see we spent 1.8 billion against our revenue resource limit. So we had a small underspending year, which allowed us to make a £500,000 surplus. But if you look at the performance over the previous 2 years, so in 1920, we had a 38.7 million deficit. And in 2018-19, we had a 41.3 million deficit. So the 3-year aggregate is 79.5 million deficit. So, thank you. Just in terms of that expenditure, I just thought it was worth showing this slide, which basically shows where we spent the money. So you can see the new element for last year was COVID-19, where we've got 10% of our expenditure specifically related to COVID. We spent 38% in the area teams. We spent 12% with commissioner contracts, which is healthcare provided by other providers in the NHS, mainly in England. 25% was with the secondary care teams, 7% was on mental health and learning disabilities, and 8% was on other expenditure. And then this graph just shows it slightly differently, so it's just showing it by type. So you can see that COVID-19 is still an exceptional item, but the majority of our spend is around pay, followed by non-pay, healthcare from other providers, and then our primary healthcare services. This is something that we show each year because it does show that a trend, the change in the trend. So the green is medical and dental expenditure on agency. You can see that it's gone from a high of 67% 5 years ago to 47% last year, but you can see that it is starting to rise again. And I think the critical bit, I guess, is we know we have a lot of nursing vacancies, and you can see that the expenditure on nursing and midwifery agency has gone from 21% 5 years ago to 32% last year. So that's just about how we manage the staff vacancies within the health board. So last year we spent 33.9 million on capital. 9.5 million of that was specifically around COVID-19, which was an additional allocation from Welsh Government. The next 2 highest categories were around, we spent 7.5 million on improving our estate and 5 million improving the technology and medical devices across the health board. And then you can see that there's a mixture of schemes within the community across the North Wales network and within the secondary care. And then I'll just talk a little bit about COVID-19 funding. So the Health Board received an additional 173 million of revenue from Welsh Government to manage the impact of COVID-19. And we, as I've just said, we had 9.5 million of capital. In terms of consumables, we had 15.7 million, which was procured for us by our partners in the NHS Wales Shared Service Partnership. And that includes obviously the huge investment that the NHS Wales made in PPE last year. And we also received 1.7 million of equipment from the Department of Health and Social Care at no cost to the Health Board. And then we spent 31 million on commissioning and running the 3 field hospitals that also were used for mass vaccination. And I think the next slide just talks a little bit about that expenditure. So we had 3 COVID-19 hospitals. in Bangor, Deeside and Llandudno, and this slide just shows how the money was spent, and it reflects the relative size of those 3 hospitals. This is an incredible effort, and I think the fact that we got them up and running and managed to get the equipment in them in such a short period was a testament to the joint working across North Wales and across NHS Wales. I think it's also worth talking about the strategic support that we have agreed with Welsh Government. So there is a multi-year package in place worth 297 million to the Health Board. 51 million of it we received last year. So we got 40 million as deficit cover, which allowed the Health Board to make that small surplus I've already discussed. We received 10.7 million to try and improve performance across the Health Board in all areas. And then we received a smaller sum of 0.7 million for capacity and capability that we used to improve leadership within mental health and learning development, engagement, governance and operational performance across the Health Board. We also have a plan now to how we're going to spend that money for the next 3 years, as we have 82 million a year for the next 3 years to start that transformation agenda for the Health Board, which Joe is going to talk about later. And then this is just around the audit of the accounts with Audit Wales. So I'm delighted to say that the accounts were submitted in line with the deadline, that there were no material misstatements or reporting inconsistencies identified during the audit by the audit team. And really, I just want to thank both the finance team and the team in Audit Wales who conducted the audit for their real diligence in making sure that they could still prepare the accounts and review them under the different working conditions that we had to adopt during COVID. And finally, the Auditor General issued an unqualified audit statement, which is really good news. But the qualified opinion on regularity just related to that first financial duty to live within the allocation. Diolch. Thank you.
Diolch yn fawr, Sue. Any questions or observations from anyone? Okay, so Sue Green, Sue Hill, vacancies were mentioned. I was at the emergency department in Wrexham Mylor yesterday, and I have to say the head of nursing and other managers there were very complimentary about the progress now being made in terms of nurse recruitment, both in terms of candidates from overseas, but also our own training programs and the work being done with Glyndŵr and with Bangor. And I know there's still some way to go, but it was good to hear that positive reporting yesterday from the team across at that hospital. Is there anything, Sue, you'd want to add, Sue Green or Sue Hill, on that point?
So if I can, Chair, so first of all, Diolch yn fawr, it's always good to get that positive feedback as well. We know that we've still got some significant challenges. I think the work that we've been doing together with Jill Harris's team and with the Myler, and then working through some of our other, providing that really dedicated and bespoke service around recruitment, but also making sure that we're linking into making sure that when we recruit people, we retain them, I think is absolutely key. I think one comment I would make in terms of particularly the agency expenditure in 2021, clearly 2021 was a bit of a different year, and the need for us to recruit in a very quick and agile way significant numbers of staff, both retirees, people from furloughed organisations, as well as just the fantastic response we had from the community was great. We also need significant increased numbers of registered and unregistered colleagues. So I think looking at 2021 compared to years is always going to be a bit of a challenge. I think that clearly the team's business to the challenge. What we now need to do is to get back into okay. So what do we need to do to achieve a sustainable workforce for the future, providing that stability and excellent patient care and services to community of North Wales. Thank you for the positive feedback always.
Okay, right. Thank you both then. So I have no other observations or questions being identified by colleagues on the board. So thanks, Sue Hill. So we'll move on, Joe, to the forward look, please.
Diolch yn fawr. Chris, if you wouldn't mind putting the next presentation up and moving on to the first slide, thank you. And we have to acknowledge that as we move towards our business as usual, to move towards tier 0 restrictions potentially in early August, we will need to be thinking about a new business as usual, whilst acknowledging the most extraordinary months that have just passed. Next slide. I'm going to talk a little about our new normal and the service transformation that we will be undertaking and we are undertaking during this year. Next slide. As part of our approach towards service transformation, we will seek the more appropriate use of digital options whilst considering making sure our services are fully digitally accessible and are available in both the English and Welsh language. And in order to make sure we make these service transformations that are right, we will engage during the course of this year with citizens, the public that we serve, whose own perceptions and priorities for healthcare are changing as in response to their own COVID-19 experience. We cannot stay the same. COVID-19 has shown us that, and we are ambitious for change. So our service transformation priorities are what I will consider over the next range of slides. They're a mixture of new priorities and continuing to work on old and existing priorities. Thank you, Chris. So moving into the next slide around planned care. Thank you. So we acknowledge how hard it is to wait for an operation or for a primary care appointment or for an outpatient attendance. And we're very mindful of our need to reduce the numbers of patients waiting, whilst acknowledging for some of our very important services, we are already achieving very well against our All Wales standards. Next slide. We know that we need to provide more outpatient sessions, more operations and more procedures within our COVID constraints, and we are supporting patients to be well whilst they're waiting pre-habilitation, so that the time spent waiting is time spent waiting well. Next slide, please. And into the next slide. We would like to significantly grow our capacity in North Wales in the short and in the long term, which is why we are strongly considering the development of diagnostic treatment centres in partnership with our colleagues in Welsh Government for the medium term. And whilst we do that work, we are also working in partnership, as we have done in previous years, with planned care providers in England, and to increase the number of theatres, inpatient beds and imaging services on our sites right now. Next slide, please. We understand the challenges associated with well-being and both the COVID-related need and an underpinning need for all age mental health services. I spoke about the place that digital services can play in service transformation, and undoubtedly those opportunities can be very powerful and extremely helpful for people, not only within the physical health environment, but also around all ages mental health environments, and recognising that virtual access isn't right for everybody at every stage of their support journey. We'll continue to work towards making face-to-face appointments available when and where we can. We have plans in place and operations in place to make sure that we are able to respond to existing and COVID-related pressures across each of the service areas identified on this slide. And then thinking about urgent and planned care, on to the next slide. We're particularly busy in primary care, in our emergency departments, in our minor injuries units, right here, right now. And we would like to acknowledge the support of all of our clinicians and our ambulance colleagues as we face a very early winter. And this is why, onto the next slide, we've developed 3 place-based urgent care improvement plans, which are being led by one of our most experienced urgent care clinicians in order to secure change. And as the chair mentioned earlier on, a recruitment of staff across the multidisciplinary team to support urgent care is particularly important. And those changes in each of the place-based plans will look at improvements across primary care, out of hours services, services within the emergency department, services to facilitate early discharge and avoidance of admission, working hand in glove with our social care and third sector partners. As part of our digital strategy, we will be maintaining and growing the number of digital options which are available to us where there is more scope so to do, whilst acknowledging for some individuals their personal preference or the clinical requirement may well be for face-to-face appointments, and of course they will be available across the whole healthcare system where that is necessary. An example of our innovation and cross-organisational working, which we will see in play during the summer months, is the application of a robotic service into Betsy Cadwaladr, the first health board to be in receipt as part of an all Wales procurement programme, thus demonstrating the importance of working not only within our 3 place-based mini healthcare systems, but also playing our part as a key player in the all Wales healthcare system. We have a long-standing commitment to improve our outcomes associated with stroke care, to reduce long-term harm and life-changing injuries. We are investing significant resources in improving our ability to respond to stroke at its most urgent phase and in its rehabilitation phase, as well as thinking about how we can work strongly to prevent patients suffering from stroke. I'm going to talk now about a number of underpinning pieces of work which enable the service transformations that I've discussed in my previous slides really come together in a consistent and appropriate way. We're starting to think about how we can make sure that our services are provided according to the best evidence and continue to be as consistent as possible, bearing in mind the differences across our 3 places, across all of Betsy Cadwaladr. We are in process of developing a whole system approach to pathways that are built with the person and the evidence at their centre. And that's very important for us to think about how we work on a one-to-one basis, clinician with patient, service with the member of, with the public. And as we move from thinking about the individual and individual excellence into our whole system thinking, into the next slide, please, and onto the living healthier, staying well. Thank you. We are in process of refreshing our Living Healthier, Staying Well organisational strategic framework. This work was commenced a few years ago, prior to A Healthier Wales and prior to our learning associated with the COVID-19 pandemic. It is timely, given the service transformation and the ambitious agenda for change we have within Betsy, for us to review our commitment to our Living Healthier, Staying Well priorities, and we will complete this work as part of our thinking around a clinical health services plan during this next financial year. Almost finally from me, to end where we almost started, in acknowledging our move out of special measures into targeted intervention or targeted improvement as we style our improvement journey. I've spoken about our 4 areas for targeted improvement change. We don't limit our ambition for improvement to those 4 areas. Underpinning our approach to service transformation, underpinning our approach to our improvement journey is our work, Mae'n Undod Mynedd, we are stronger together. This work currently in play is involving us listening respectfully and carefully to what our partners are telling us about being in our Betsy community. Our staff and our partners are telling us they are hopeful for the future. They are realistic about the challenges. They believe we are stronger together. Diolch yn fawr. Thank you.
Diolch yn fawr, Joe. Okay, so I'm going to open it up again. Any questions or observations?
Yes, please, Mark.
Okay, Lucy and then John. Thank you.
Thanks. Sorry, I couldn't find my hand there. Thank you very much for that, Joe. Firstly, before I've got a general comment, but firstly, I'd like to thank all of our primary care providers for their flexibility and dedication throughout the pandemic. They've continued to provide face-to-face consultations where appropriate throughout, and it's an area that is often forgotten in relation to how, you know, they've been able to provide care under these circumstances as well. So I just wanted to flag that up and extend our thanks to them. In relation to the development of the patient care pathways, I really welcome this area of work, and we've talked about it a lot in the last 12 months. And I think the pandemic has shown that this really is an area that can have this significant impact upon both patient safety and patient experience. And the pandemic itself has introduced new ways of providing care that probably wouldn't have been delivered if it were not for the pandemic itself. But communication and engagement is clearly going to be vital in this area of work. And as we develop these pathways. Many of our population will be anticipating a return to normal. And some of this is about managing expectations and working with our population so that they are aware of what they can expect as part of these going forward. I certainly welcome the increased communication that's been going out to our patients, and I just hope that actually continues as we develop these pathways. Thank you.
Thanks, Lucy. Joe, did you want to respond?
Lucy, I certainly echo your thanks and acknowledgement of the significant contribution that our primary care partners have made to providing services during the pandemic, incredibly busy and stressful time. And on top of that, they have been absolute stalwarts of our vaccination programme, absolutely gone over and above and continue to do so in this current year. So an echoed thank you from me. The opportunity across the work that Lucy has described to think whole system pathway, self-care, community, primary care, prevention prior to inpatient, outpatient, diagnostic help and support for our people is and will be key to our success going forward. And taking the opportunity to make sure through that pathway work, we're also looking to embed some of the innovative changes that have been in play in Wales and in the UK and indeed across the world in terms of new ways of working and new ways of thinking about healthcare will be a really exciting aspect of our work going forward. Thank you, Lucy.
Joe. John?
Diolch yn fawr. Just a sort of couple of observations from me. I think building on what Lucy raised around the pathways, it just feels a much more positive forward look than we've had in previous years. With the strategic financial support we've had from Welsh Government, the work on the pathways, it just feels like the opportunity for service transformation and improvement of what we deliver is better than it has been in the past, particularly with a focus on the diagnostic and treatment centres and the opportunities that present itself from using better investment in the digital side of things to help drive that service transformation. I think it's worth stressing as well that from the stuff that I've seen, the aim is that where we invest in digital, we won't be leaving people behind. No, there won't be that disadvantaging people where they can't use the digital approaches, but it just feels overall that the prospects for us are much more positive than they have been, and I just wanted to commend that.
Jay? Thanks, John.
Diolch yn fawr, John. Yes, you're absolutely right. We certainly don't intend to leave anybody behind from a digital accessibility point of view. Yes, I acknowledge your comments. Thank you.
Yeah, Joe. Okay, some comments from me then. And in keeping with what Lucy and John have said, so first of all, we are committed as a board, aren't we, to revisiting the Living Healthier Stay in Wales strategy, as Joe has identified, because we all want to be clear about where our ambition lies, where the priorities lie moving forward in the medium to long term, and to ensure that through the organisational development programme, staff are able to contribute to that direction and supporting us in moving forward to pursue those priorities. Second thing is, we have agreed that the planning process for the annual plan, let alone the integrated medium-term plan, will be advanced this year So we will expect to see the first version of the plan in December of this year. So we can start to ensure as a board that there has been effective engagement with the staff and stakeholders, and also that we are able to agree the plan far earlier, prepare ourselves for delivery against that plan far earlier than has been the case in the past. As John has alluded to, we have, and Joe referred to, we have received considerable amount of funding in year for the next 3 years, and also other sources of funding to assist with COVID now and for the remainder of this year. And it's important, isn't it, that the organisation, the board, ensures that money is directed towards dealing with the pressures as they exist now, but also to ensure that we are building the base to pursue those plans and strategies, but also fundamentally to transform and deliver service improvement in the way that our communities and patients have got a right to expect. And in that regard, we are keeping a close eye on how that money is being used. This week, Chris has provided an update which is about to be shared to me and to you in terms of how we move forward with the transformation work to improve those services. I think it is a timely, helpful and appropriate update, and I would hope the board will agree with that when they see it. In the meantime, of course, the work continues around the targeted intervention framework that Joe has referred to. And again, being shared with the board is the presentation that the executive team provided to Welsh Government officials this week, and also Joe's readout from that meeting. And I've also seen a readout from a Welsh Government official in terms of that meeting. And suffice to say that readout from in all respects and from all parties was once again very positive. So that is the second TI targeted intervention meeting that's taken place between officials and the executive team, where there are clearly positive signs of improvement, confidence, and so on and so forth. And as John has identified, that forward look gives you a sense and should give our public and communities a sense for that. But of course, what's really important is that we continue to forge ahead, we continue to build on that growing sense of confidence, and we continue to improve and deliver what our patients and communities expect. And I'm sure that we will all support and join the organisation in doing so as a board, and we look forward to that journey and improving in the way that Joe has described and John and Lucy have acknowledged. The clinical strategy will of course be also important, as will the clinical pathways, and it feels to me, following the visit yesterday as an example, that clinicians feel far better engaged than they have been in the past. And that has to be the case because we want them to help us shape that clinical services strategy and those clinical pathways, because they know more about them than we do. So with that, I'll stop. Joe and team, thank you for the presentation and report. Thank you for the progress that's being made. We look forward to receiving signs of further progress in the way that you and I have described, Joe, and feel sure that together we can move forward cooperatively, positively, and so as to improve. So without further ado, then I will now turn to the question and answer session. Advanced questions have been sought from members of the public and will now be responded to by the relevant executive. A written response will also be sent following the meeting to those who posed the questions, and any questions that pertain to an individual patient or staff member will be responded to directly. So I will read the questions and then I will ask the relevant executive to respond. So question 1 was submitted by Mr. Derek Brown of the Royal College of Nursing and reads, and I quote, "How has the Health Board complied with the Nurse Staffing Wales Act 2016 legislation throughout the pandemic, and what preparations are in place for the extension of Section 25B of the Act to paediatrics?" And I invite Jill Harris, our Executive Director of Nursing and Midwifery, to respond. Jill.
Diolch, Chair. Just to respond to that question, staffing reviews did continue to take place throughout the pandemic and continue to be undertaken now in line with the Act as referenced in the Health Board's nurse staffing policy, noting that there was the deferral of acuity audits in response to an all WOWs decision and given the escalation processes that were underway at the time. During the pandemic, these reviews were dynamic due to the repurposing nature required of wards to meet the needs of the pandemic, and these have been presented to the board. Daily health boards and nurse staffing deployment meetings were convened as an incident management response to support staff in escalation requirements, and significant recruitment, and you alluded to some of that earlier, Chair, has been undertaken, both substantive and temporary, as part of the organisational response to the COVID-19 pandemic preparation and the vaccination programme. In preparation, the Health Board has also provided a range of upskilling opportunities for nursing teams, non-clinical staff, allied health professionals, public volunteers, which further facilitated the Health Board's response to the first wave of the unprecedented pandemic, which has then continued throughout with support from university colleagues. Surge plans were developed in response to the pandemic data modelling that was issued by Welsh governments, and these were monitored alongside real-time data and amended accordingly. And this reflected the staff position in the Health Board, which was dynamic across the west to east and east to west, so responded accordingly. I would just like at this point, Mark, before I answer the second part of the question, to actually reflect my own thanks to those staff who were dynamically redeployed to areas that perhaps they were less familiar with in order to respond to the needs of our public and the needs of their colleagues during that pandemic. And I just wish to and continue to do so as we move forward. So I just want to express publicly my own personal thanks for their flexibility and their professionalism in responding to that challenge. In terms of the second element of the question, the paediatric services are progressing work to meet the legislative requirements of the Act, which is due to come into force of October this year. Actions being closely tracked to ensure that we are ready and that national milestones are met. Staff have been already familiarising themselves with the methodology of the paediatric Welsh levels of care, which are already well embedded, and both acuity and staffing data is collected on a daily basis with validation exercises underway to ensure the consistency of use across our 3 inpatient areas.
Thanks, Jill. So I will move on to question 2, which was also submitted by Mr. Brown of the RCN and reads as follows. What is the compliance with PADR, which is our appraisal system and mandatory training? I'm aware manual handling compliance is identified as a risk. It would be reassuring to know there is immediate action being taken to address this. Close quotes. Sue Green, our Executive Director of Workforce and Organisational Development, will respond, I think. Sue.
Yeah, Chairman. First of all, thank you for Derek for raising the questions. So our PADR, which is our Performance Appraisal Development Review, is currently 71%. Clearly, that is lower than we would want it to do. We have seen a pretty continuous improvement since the June 20 position, which was at 65%. Prior to the pandemic, we had been making significant progress around performance development review. Clearly, during the pandemic, there weren't the opportunities necessarily to have the one-to-one conversations that are absolutely key from an appraisal point of view. Additionally, some of the scheme appraisal approach that we've taken, particularly with areas such as our estates and facilities colleagues, again, were significantly hampered by the pandemic. So teams have been working really hard across the organisation to make sure that we are able to facilitate those. As part of Men in Dod Main Earth, as Joe talked about earlier, one of the things clearly we'll be looking at is whether there are better ways for us to enable and empower and facilitate colleagues to have discussions about how things are going, how people's contribution is impacting, how people's contribution needs to be further developed and moving forward. So I'm anticipating some recommendations coming out of recovery around how do we facilitate performance appraisal and development review moving forward. In terms of mandatory risk management training, again, this has been significantly impacted during COVID pandemic. There has been a greater level of opportunity to undertake the e-learning modules, clearly with lots of people working from home, and we made sure we facilitated. We didn't necessarily need laptops, etc., to be able to do that. We haven't seen the drop that a number of other organisations and a number of other organisations across Wales have seen. One of the biggest impacts, though, are those elements of mandatory risk management training that need to be physical, need to be face-to-face, and it's called manual handling, but actually the element that needs to be face-to-face is actually more around full handling, so safely supporting our patient movement, safely supporting patients to mobilise, and that element has been significantly impacted, in part due to gaps in the teams that deliver the training, but actually more fundamentally being able to provide this training in a COVID-safe way. We've been working really closely with colleagues in operational and with our trade union partners, who I have to say, and I'm going to say this, it have been absolutely fantastic working with us throughout the pandemic in the last 12 months on really making sure that we work together in keeping everybody as safe as possible, and that's safe not just from COVID, but from harm. So we have developed a recovery programme for our manual handling training. We have had great support so far from the executive and from colleagues across the organisation in identifying both facilities, but also staff who can support us in delivering that training. And we have a further proposal going through the executive team at the moment, which is very much seeking to achieve recovery against people handling training in the next 12 months to 18 months to get fully recovered. In the meantime, we have mitigating actions in place based on thorough risk assessment, both on a case-by-case basis, but also on a service-by-service basis. So we're not putting our staff and our patients at risk.
Thanks, Sue. Just to let you know, you are breaking, certainly on my IT in the office. You are understandable, but you are breaking a bit. But as I say, you're understandable. So we'll stick with the connection that we got, I think. So question 3 was also submitted by Mr. Brown of the RCM and reads, what has been the staff turnover during the pandemic, and what strategies are the health board putting in place for recruitment and retention? I think, Sue, you're going to respond again and cover both recruitment and retention.
Yes, and hopefully I can not move around too much so that the signal isn't broken. So in terms of the organisation's turnover, at the end of June, appreciate this around 2020, at the end of June we were at 8.6% turnover, and at the end of March we were 8.3%. At the same period in June 20, we were at 7.9%. Again, linked back to that is not out of kilter. Neither levels are out of kilter with the rest of NHS Wales, and actually the NHS more broadly. Turnover significantly dropped across the public sector in 2020 through the pandemic, and clearly we've seen it increase again. We have seen a level of turnover both linked to some of the temporary workforce that we recruited at the height of the pandemic, but also we have started to see greater levels of turnover around people who had kind of been possibly due to retire in 2020 or or had potentially wanted to move on as part of their career path in 2020. We have started to see an increase, and I think we'd always anticipated that we'd start to see an increase in both retirements, early retirements, and people moving to other sectors. We have, as Jill alluded to earlier on, and from a medical point of view as well, and from a health science organisation point of view, we have a number of things in place and working, and actually you talked a bit about the kind of the early shoots of some of that work. Very much recognise that we need to do something different from some of our services around recruitment. Some of this is about developing pathways to grow our own, so that we've got a sustainable workforce. Some of it is actually being a little bit more creative and bespoke around our recruitment campaign work. So working with a number of organisations, as well as working really close with our clinical and non-clinical organisations to ensure that we are proactive in terms of our recruitment. We're also undertaking a review of our recruitment processes to make sure, as well as being proactive, we're as efficient as we possibly can be. And in terms of our time to recruit, time to hire, again, we've been benchmarked across Wales and then the wider NHS to identify whether there are any significant improvements that we can make in terms of our process. Turning to retention, as we talked about at the last annual general meeting, there is significant work to make sure that we are, as well as recruiting, we are retaining the people that we recruit and retaining that knowledge and
Am I the only one to have lost Sue?
around.
No.
So you can hear me. We lost you completely for a moment. So
right. Sorry.
Carry on.
Okay, so I was on retention. Had you got retention? You're on mute.
Sorry, we heard retention and we lost you. So can we do the retention piece, please?
Okay, yeah, absolutely. So we talked about retention at the last annual general meeting, and retention will always be an area of strong focus. We have been working really closely with Jules, Arpan's, Adrian's and Chris's teams, particularly around the particular dynamics of retention in those areas. We have augmented and enhanced the exit intake type process. But for me, the discovery in Men in Domain Earth is going to be absolutely invaluable in understanding what it's like to work in the organisation, what frustrates people within the organisation, as well as what really provides people across the organisation with a platform to progress through the NHS, the public sector, and actually are we creating some really great people for the wider NHS that we might want to retain in the Betsy family. So the work that we've done to date is also being reviewed as part of the discovery phase of Men in Domain Earth and will form part of the outcome and the organisational leadership strategy of 2022-25, as well as the workforce strategy and plan for 2022-25. Hoping I haven't frozen.
I know we did hear you a little better towards the end. It's quite fragile, I think, at the moment, your connection. So
yeah, sorry, I have been having some this morning, but apologies for that. But clearly, I'll set that all out in right.
Okay, thanks for that, Joe. So we now move on to question 4, which was the final question submitted by Mr. Brown of the RCN, and reads, what are the top 3 priorities within the recovery plan? And Jill, I believe you're going to respond to that.
Diolch, I am, and thank you again, Derek, for your question. Top 3 priorities of our 6-point recovery plan have been shared with both our board and our finance and performance meeting. and obviously is a high priority for us, as Joe alluded to. We're acutely aware of the impact that delays are having on our public and citizens. But the top 3 priorities of our recovery plan are to restart all planned care services. This is now ongoing, albeit that our capacity levels are reduced as a consequence of some of the mitigation we've had to put in place as a consequence of COVID, including our red and green pathways, social distancing, and the enhanced use of PPE. So we do acknowledge that there is not the same capacity as we had available to us previously, and this remains fragile given the pressures on our unscheduled care. The second point is, whilst treating this year's activity, we're also looking to treat the cohort of patients that were not treated either before the pandemic or during the pandemic. These are broken down by specialty, and we are working on calculations on how long it will take. In fact, those calculations are complete, but they're ongoing, Mark, as a consequence of people joining that list. The capacity required will be delivered through additional clinical sessions, outsourcing with the independent sector, and insourcing additional capacity to support that we have available to ourselves. The third point is around transforming services, and again, this was outlined in Joe's opening presentations. Transforming services to improve patient outcomes and reduce patient wait times. This will be achieved via the 6-point recovery plan, but does include new pathways straight to test for those patients who are waiting longer for their treatment, or where it's appropriate for them to have their test ahead of seeing a specialist. Modernising our outpatient services, and we've continued to use Attend Anywhere where that's appropriate, and pursuing a diagnostic and treatment centre approach, which again Joe alluded to in her earlier presentation. Diolch, Chair.
Deal. So final question was submitted by Mr. Phil Jones on behalf of the Anmer Surgery Patient Action Group, and reads: does the Health Board agree with Welsh Government that the future proofing of its primary care premises is essential for sustainability? GPs currently working in your premises, designed and built as recently as 2017, report as not having space to house community health staff. This situation will have been made more acute by the current trend in migration from urban into rural areas, together with the increased ability to work from home. How will the board ensure that flexibility for the future is included in all primary care builds? I will ask Chris Stockport, Director of Primary Care and Community Services, to respond to that question. Chris.
Diolch, Chair, and Board our pawb. The original question, does the Health Board agree with Welsh Government that future proofing of its primary care premises is essential for sustainability? Well, I can give an absolutely unqualified yes, it does. We want to deliver more care closer to home, and that's absolutely the right place for more care to be delivered. But we can only do that if our estate in primary and community care is fit for purpose and can accommodate that. It's worth sharing that Welsh Government have recently just actually reviewed all GP premises in Wales, and we're looking forward to receiving that report for our premises, so that we can incorporate their most recent findings into our existing estate strategy. Viewers might like to know we've currently got 2 builds underway, 2 new primary care builds underway, one in Ruthin and one just about to start in Waenvar, and as well as those, a much larger number of smaller improvements to existing primary care buildings. But there is more work to be done, and as the question refers, the pandemic has very clearly demonstrated that many of our primary care buildings are not designed to deal with situations like that, nor the fact that more people are now working from home, as was raised in the question. Flexibility is going to be absolutely essential. We work very closely with NHS Wales Shared Services Partnership to make sure that we can maximise the flexibility that both best practice and the funding rules allow us to do. As part of that, we've been discussing opportunities to improve facilities in Hanmer, and we will be continuing those conversations over the near future with a view to improving services in Hanmer as soon as possible. But Hanmer is one of a number of our primary care estates that we are now looking to progress so that services are more sustainable.
Chris, can I just confirm my own understanding that subject to the nature of the premises, there are limitations about the nature of the investment that we can offer in keeping with national rules?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are rules in terms of what primary care estates should look like, and where we have built premises, and the question referred to from 1997, we've only ever built premises that are adherent to those rules. But of course, a number of individuals are now looking at whether or not those rules are fit going forward, and whether or not there needs to be any additional flexibility within that. Now, of course, we'll welcome that, but we still have to work within the rules, and it's for that reason that we are very, very closely related to the Shared Services Partnership, because that allows us to recognise where flexibility exists, and to get schemes through the approval cycle, and to secure the necessary funding with as little delay and obstacle as we possibly can.
Thanks, Chris. So that is the last question for this meeting. So in terms of concluding remarks from me, I want to thank Joe and the team for their presentations today, and for the work that they're leading with the organisation to move the organisation and health services in North Wales forward. At this point, I'd also like to record that this is Avion Jones's last full board member as an independent member with us, as he will be taking up another role. Avion joined the board in August 2019 and has always provided a valuable input at the meetings that we've held, and particularly at the Finance Performance Committee. And on a personal level, I found him to be really helpful and supportive to me in my role. So I'm sure you will join me in thanking Avion and wishing him well for the future. Diolch yn fawr, Avion. And then finally, that brings me on to recruitment. We currently have 3 vacancies for independent members with particular responsibilities in terms of finance, community, and the third sector. We are out to advert at the moment, and so anybody viewing this meeting is encouraged to, if they wish, to find the details on our website in terms of those opportunities, or indeed to direct any people that they know who might be interested for those opportunities, because we are keen to recruit, and we are keen to recruit people who are capable of representing our patients and communities at this board and at future meetings. So I'll stop there. Diolch yn fawr iawn. Who will?